Chris Watts stood on his front lawn and asked the country to help him find his wife and daughters. He had buried their bodies 40 miles away that morning. Frederick, Colorado, August 13, 2018. A man in a gray t-shirt stands surrounded by microphones. He looks tired. He talks about how much he misses them. He says he hopes they come home safe. Reporters nod. Neighbors watch from their driveways. Somewhere behind his eyes, 3 bodies are already cooling in the Colorado dirt. How does someone do that? What has to be missing in a person for that to be possible? Not the killing, but the part after. The part where he stands in the sun and performs the one emotion he no longer has access to. The FBI's behavioral analysts watched that same footage within hours of it airing. They didn't see a grieving husband. They saw something else, a pattern of tells so specific that trained investigators started making phone calls before the sun went down. What those tells were, and what they mean, is where this story actually begins. Shannon Watts documented everything. The vacations, the girls' birthdays, the Thrive products she sold, the marriage, a life in Frederick that looked from the outside like exactly what it was supposed to look like. Hundreds of thousands of people followed along. Chris appeared in the frame, sometimes quiet, smiling, present. The camera never showed the rest. $70,000 in debt, a house sliding toward foreclosure, a marriage Shannon had been holding together in part through the sheer discipline of documenting it as happy. And since June, an affair. Nicole Kessinger, a co-worker at Anadarko Petroleum. Watts had told no one. Shannon had built her entire public identity on being seen. She had no idea that the same instinct, post it, share it, keep the record, would end up being the thing that told her story after she couldn't tell it herself. Shannon landed home at 1:48 in the morning, back from a business trip. 15 weeks pregnant with a boy they'd already named Nico. On the flight home, she'd been texting friends about the state of her marriage. She had no way of knowing it was the last conversation she'd ever have with them. The girls were asleep down the hall. Bella 4, Celeste 3. What happened next took place inside that house in the dark, and this script won't walk through it beyond what the record requires. Before dawn, Watts drove to Survey 319, an oil field 40 miles out, a site he knew from work with his family in the truck. He clocked in for his shift at 7:30 that morning. His supervisor said later he seemed normal. He worked the shift. Then he went home, texted a friend of Shannon's, casual, worried, asking if she'd heard from her. Waited. Shannon's own words ended up mapping the last hours of her life more precisely than any witness could have. The texts on the plane, the messages to her friend about the marriage. She had spent years building a public record without knowing that record would someday be read as evidence. Here is what the tape actually shows. Watts calls Shannon a good wife. Not is, was, past tense, hours before anyone but him knew she was gone. A reporter asks if he wants his family to come home. There's a half-second where his shoulder lifts and drops, a shrug, small, almost nothing. Behavioral analysts call it a non-verbal contradiction. The mouth says yes, the body says something else. No tears. On its own, that means little. Grief doesn't follow one script. But stacked with the past tense, the shrug, the flattened affect, it started to read as something specific to the people trained to read it. There's a difference between grief and the performance of grief. Real grief is disorganized. It stutters, it contradicts itself. It doesn't know what it's supposed to look like. Performed grief follows a script because the person doing it is working from what they believe grief should resemble, not from what they're actually feeling. Watts followed the script closely. The script was wrong in the details that mattered. Investigators reviewing the footage that same afternoon started making calls before the search had even fully organized. August 15th, 2 days later, Watts walked into the Frederick Police Department voluntarily, told it was routine. It wasn't. Investigators played him footage from a neighbor's security camera, his own truck, his own driveway the morning of the 13th, items going into the bed of it. He gave them a story, that he'd told Shannon he wanted to separate, that he'd watched through the bedroom window while she strangled both girls herself, that he'd killed her afterward in a rage. The lie held for a few hours. Then crews found the site at Survey 319. Then it collapsed entirely. He was arrested that day, 72 hours after standing on his lawn and asking the country to help him find them. November 6, 2018, Weld County courtroom, 9 counts, 3 counts of first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, tampering with a deceased human body twice over. Shannon's family agreed to take the death penalty off the table in exchange for a guilty plea. They didn't want a trial. They didn't want the details read aloud in open court, in front of cameras, for strangers to hear. The judge described it as among the most inhumane crimes he had presided over. 5 consecutive life sentences, no possibility of parole. Chris Watts was 33. February 2019. Watts sat down again with investigators, this time inside the prison. They called it the Sermon on the Powder. He told them the first confession, the one about watching through the window, had been a lie built to protect himself. Then he told them something closer to what happened. This part of the story doesn't need graphic detail to carry weight, and it won't get any here. What's documented in the official record is this: Bella saw something she shouldn't have seen and asked what was wrong with her mother. What happened in the seconds after that question is contained in sealed investigative material. It is enough to say that a 4-year-old asked that question at all. Shannon's parents said afterward that they wished they had never been told. That single sentence carries more than any further description could. Watts has since walked parts of this confession back. He said he'd found faith in prison, that coming clean mattered to him. Investigators noticed the pattern by then: confess, recant, confess again, each version shaped a little differently. The only consistent thread they found wasn't honesty. It was control over how he was seen. Chris Watts is 39 now. 5 consecutive life sentences, served at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, moved out of Colorado for his own safety not long after sentencing. He receives letters, dozens of them from women who have never met him. There's a name for the pattern in true crime circles: hybristophilia, an attraction to people who have committed violent crimes. Watts has become one of its more visible modern subjects. In April 2025, letters he'd written from prison surfaced through the Daily Mail. In them, he assigns blame to Shannon, to his mother, to Kessinger, for the circumstances that led to what he did, not to himself. Shannon's family responded publicly when the letters came out. Their response doesn't need commentary added to it. It stands on its own. No appeal has been filed. None is available to him under the terms of the plea. He will die in that prison. Shannon documented everything. Every vacation, every birthday, every product she believed in enough to sell. She filmed her life on the assumption that the man standing next to her in those videos was who he appeared to be. The Netflix documentary that told her story afterward was built almost entirely from her own footage. She recorded her own life so completely that, without knowing it, she recorded the beginning of her own case file. Bella was 4, Celeste was 3, Nico was never born. Chris Watts is 39 years old in a Wisconsin prison, still writing letters about whose fault it was. Shannon never got to write her own ending. He's still trying to write his. If this case made you think, tell me what you think in the comments. And if you want the next full breakdown, it's already up.